lose yourself in a good book. The Bookclub Energy Book Club.
Now, Sister Caravaggio, which I have to say is a bloody good title for a book before we even start.
Hear, hear.
It's a light-hearted crime tale about the theft of a Caravaggio painting from a convent, which prompts two of the nuns to set off in pursuit of the painting in order to save their home/convent.
I love one of them being an ex-cop. Ex-cop/sister. It's very good. It was written by 7 authors. It's a very interesting idea. 7 authors wrote this book, including Cormac Miller and the late Maeve Binchy. Here to chat about the book and the man whose idea it was and who put it together. And one of the authors is Peter Cunningham. Peter, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Peter, where did this wonderful idea spring from?
Well, it sort of started, the story was the first thing, really.
Okay.
So with this great story, and everybody knows nuns. And, you know, we've all grown up with sort of these very large convents all over Ireland that are full of nuns. But nowadays, you know, these large buildings, maybe there's only 3 or 4 of them in it. So we had this idea about nuns, and people are interested in nuns, and nuns make great characters. And so we came up with this idea of a convent in County Kildare, which is in an old castle.
Okay.
There's only 5 nuns left. And they're really dependent. They've got a dairy herd, but that doesn't make very much money. And the whole thing is crumbling around their ears. The only thing that keeps them going is the income from tourists, that tourists pay to look at their Caravaggio in their chapel.
I love that there's a Caravaggio in a chapel in a castle, which is a convent in Kildare.
It's a fragment of a Caravaggio.
Well, that's true, yes, it's not the whole thing.
And, of course, this is a silent order. The only time they ever hear each other's voices is when they're in choir in the chapel. So, really, the difference between their being destitute and surviving in Doon Abbey in County Kildare, in this lovely old castle, is the income from the Caravaggio. One morning, they come into chapel for lauds at, I think it's about 4:30 in the middle of June, and the Caravaggio is gone.
Da, da, da.
Ba-ba. Wow. So suddenly you've got a story. Basically myself and 2 friends, because I live in County Kildare, and so does Mary O'Donnell and Neil Donnelly, and we're having coffee one morning. We had this great idea, this great story, and we said, maybe we'll all write it. And then we sort of spun it out from there, and I was fascinated, actually, as I got into the project, as how this would work with, as it turned out in the end, 7 writers, including, as you say, Maeve Binchy.
Maeve Binchy, yeah.
Yeah, poor Maeve, who was a fantastic person.
This one would have been one of the last things she wrote.
I guess it must have been, yeah.
I'd say she probably jumped at the idea.
She loved it, and she loved, as I did, she was fascinated with the technical aspects of it, as to how actually, if you had this arc of a story, which was a good story, how each person would actually treat it.
How do you decide which writer goes at which part of the arc?
Well, exactly, but it was really potluck, to be honest with you.
Did you draw lots?
Because not everybody was on board at the beginning, and we kind of added them on as we went. And we're not saying who wrote which. That's
another one of the mysteries. That's a lovely idea, actually.
Yeah.
How did it work from the point of view of, of you saying to each writer what you wanted them to do? Because did you let them know what other people had done previously and what they were going to do afterwards, or did you just let them off?
Well, we had a sort of a plot.
Okay.
We had a sort of a kind of an overall plot, which was very murky. We had a sort of a beginning, a middle and an end.
So there were rough parameters.
Very rough, because...
There would have to be. Yeah,
you couldn't have one person sort of landing you in Moscow, and you had to...
be utterly disjointed.
You couldn't get out of that. So basically, so each person who came to their chapter knew what had gone just before.
Okay.
In the chapter, or chapters before. And then knew what his or her chapter was going to be, but not what came after.
They had to have a rough idea of where they were, the rough direction they were heading in.
Yes, but they didn't know what was going to happen.
You could really set it up for the next person to come after you. You could make it horrifically difficult.
Or leave them in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, here's an interesting point. What happens, Peter, for example, if one of the writers in chapter 4 or 5 decides, actually, these 2 nuns are going to fall in love with each other? I mean, would that have been permissible within the arc of the story, or would one of the writers have been allowed to throw that kind of curveball?
Well, you had your basic plot, I suppose.
Yeah. And I don't see why not. I mean, that didn't actually happen. I mean, the 2 nuns got on terribly well, and they're actually, and this is part of the.
That's not a euphemism now, is it?
No. This is part of the fun of the book, because they had to take off their habits. One of them hadn't been in civilian clothes for 14 years. They had to go into the kind of bargain basement of a supermarket, or of a large retail outlet, shall we say. and find bargain basement clothes, and they end up wearing sort of high heels and miniskirts and things, which they're most unused to. That's also the other thing. So I remember, actually I have very fond memories of nuns, because my first educational experience was in a kindergarten in Tramore in County Waterford. There was this wonderful, wonderful woman called Mother Monica. She was wonderfully loving, and I really had a very positive experience. It's the only time I sort of encountered nuns, but she had all this white stuff, that you kind of protecting her from the world. So you didn't really know what lay beneath.
I was just thinking, because Maeve Binchy went to the same school that I went to, which was Holy Child Colony, which was a convent.
Yes, yeah.
So that would have been, she would have been influenced by the nuns there.
She loved the idea.
Yeah.
She loved the idea of getting the nuns, what would happen when the nuns left the convent.
So we get to read a great story with a great plot, and we have to try and work out as well who wrote what.
Exactly.
Can you confirm your suspicions when you read it?
You definitely wrote the first chapter, didn't you?
I couldn't confirm that.
You can't confirm that, Mark.
Well, listen, thank you very much, Peter Cunningham.
Great idea.
Sister Caravaggio.
Available now in all good bookshops. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Lose yourself in a good book. The Board Gosh Energy Book Club.